I had lunch with an agent named Sam Cohn, who represented Peter Maas at that time. And he mentioned this story about this police officer who was very unusual at that time. He mentioned that they were considering making a film of this if they could get somebody to run with the ball. And at that time, I was about to make a transition from manager to producer. I mean, I had represented producers, I had represented all kinds of people, and I really didn't want to do that anymore. And I decided that I wanted to do something on my own. I've always had a desire to produce films. I had a client then, Al Pacino, who was a wonderful actor, and he did, at that point, one very successful film, which was Godfather. But Godfather pretty much ended up as Brando's film, okay, and also as Francis's film, which it was. And I wanted to come out with Serpico, and I wanted that to be my first, and that's how I got involved. I couldn't get a studio to finance the development of the material. They decided that this was the end of a cop cycle. There were 17 films in the past 2 years dealing with police officers in New York. Most of them were dreadful. Most of them were shoot-'em-ups, you know, with heroic cops who killed 15 people. I mean, it wasn't real. And having grown up in New York and having been raised in fairly tough areas, I knew what cops did. Most of them never fire their weapon. Most of them don't get in confrontations with bad guys. And this story just appealed to me. I finally went at Sam Cohn's direction, to Dino De Laurentiis. Dino De Laurentiis had made a film a few years before this, based on a book by Peter Maas. And Al was Italian, which appealed to Dino, who spoke very little English. And we went from there. That's how I got into the business of making Serpico and also dealing with Mr. De Laurentiis.
It's incredible. But I feel like a criminal because I don't take money.
I never met anybody like a Frank Serpico before. And a lot of the kids I grew up with when I was growing up became cops. And a lot of friends I had when I was a kid were cops. Frank Serpico was not like anybody.
Let's face it, who can trust a cop who don't take money?
Frank Serpico was a truth sayer. Frank Serpico was a very rigid man when it came to morality in terms of what a policeman could do, should do, and wouldn't do. I sat in a theater at one point. We were looking at directors, and I invited him along. And this was a theater on 57th Street. Forget the Guild or one of those theaters, one of those art houses. And there was nobody in the theater. I mean, nobody. It was a 2 o'clock showing or a 1 o'clock showing in the afternoon, midweek. And not a very successful film, so there wasn't an audience there. And I lit a cigarette. I was a big smoker then. Well, about 30 seconds into my cigarette, I get a poke in the shoulder from Frank saying, you know, you really can't smoke here, you know. I said, there's nobody here, Frank, just you and me. He says, you can't smoke, it's against the law. Now, that's who Frank Serpico was.
If I was broke, if I had a family, I don't know. But I'm not broke and I don't have a family.
At the beginning of this project, there was another director involved. There was a film that I admired. It was called Joe. It was a little film, but it was brilliantly done by a director named John Avildsen. John Avildsen and I did not agree on many things, and one of the things we didn't agree on was story. I did not want to make a film about the politics of the subject, about the Knapp Commission. I mean, that's a television show. I wanted to make a film about the characters. So we had a big disagreement. We had a big disagreement on the way he was approaching this, and he left. And then Sidney got involved. He was available, he was a good director, and he was somebody that I believed I could make the film with. And we just went forward.
So I read Peter's book and met Dino the next day, and the following day met Al and Marty, which was my first exposure. It moved very quickly. I think I was hired in 3 days or something. The script was chaotic when I arrived. Waldo Salt's script existed, and it was marvelous. It had a problem, however. It was 240 pages long, which would have been exactly twice the length of a normal movie. It would have been a 4.5 hour movie. The work that Wexler had done was mainly structural. He had just cut it down into a much reduced circumstance, and quite brilliantly, too. Structurally, it was still very strong. And yet, his language was not as good as Waldo Salt's. That's simple. So that when we got to rehearsal, Al knew Waldo Salt's script much better than I did. Because, as I say, I came on, rehearsals were like a week, 10 days away at the most. And so at rehearsal, we'd hit a scene that Wexler had included structurally. And Al would come in with Waldo Salt's version of that scene in dialogue. In most instances, it was better. And we would just incorporate it so that we basically, what the picture wound up with was Wexler's structure and Waldo Salt's language, all based on Peter's research, of course. I'd never met Serpico before we began work on this. And I didn't meet him until about 3 days before we started rehearsals.
What are you doing?
He was extraordinary, very frantic, very funny, very alive, very busy, and filled with great fun about it. And I know he and Al had been spending a lot of time together. Had gotten very close.
Al works from the character. Al works more from the character than story. So he's very interested in meeting Frank Serpico. And Frank was studied by Al. Not so much in what he sounded like, although a little. Not so much in what he looked like, although there was a little bit of that. But more important is how Frank thought. And he did study Frank. They spent time together. Frank wanted to hang around, but that's normal. When somebody's doing a film of your life, you want to see what the guy is doing. You want to see what the actor is doing. You want to see how he is mimicking you, he is becoming you. That's natural. It was, I think, disturbing for Al, and obviously disturbing for Sidney.
I'm sure he felt that when he met me and when he met Al, this was going to be his life from now on in, you know. There he was in show business. And then this terrific shock came, because the day before we began to shoot, I said, Frank, it's been wonderful, and you've been so helpful, et cetera, but bye-bye. And he was absolutely shocked. And he thought he had done something or offended. I said, no, you got to understand, Al is going to be playing you. He can't do that if you're right off camera watching him. It's going to make him so self-conscious. It would be true of any actor. So until the picture's cut and put together, I'm afraid it's goodbye. And I think his feelings were enormously hurt by that, because I think he really had this fantasy that he was by now Al's best friend and my best friend. And it's part of the brutality of movies, but to us it was just research.
Through my appearance here today, I hope that police officers in the future will not experience the same frustration and anxiety that I was subjected.
We're so used to corruption stories now, but then, we're talking 30 years ago, it was brand new. And the Knapp Commission had just happened in New York. There'd been no material on it in terms of movies at all. There'd been just newspaper stories and Peter's book. So it was absolutely new, shocking. It was common knowledge in the police department, but not in terms of the public.
We're not doing anything bad here. We're skimming a little gambling money.
There will always be dishonest cops, there'll be dishonest filmmakers, there'll be dishonest dentists. You know, there's a certain portion of our society that is basically dishonest. I've made too many cop films not to know how they think or how they work. No, they're a very interesting group of guys. Most of them go into police work. They want to help people. That sounds kind of altruistic, but it's true. They really want to help people. They're brave guys.
All my life I wanted to be a cop. You know? It's like I can remember nothing else.
The first day of shooting, I generally like to do some very simple work. Going into a door, coming out of a door. Nothing that's going to place any demand on the actors, because they're not used to anything yet. They're not used to the crew, each other, really, in terms of camera. So I like to keep things simple for them and simple technically, but also something that's going to let the crew know that we're going to be moving quickly. So because the setups are simple, because the action is simple, I'll very often just do one take. Most directors do 4, 6, 8, 20, 30 takes. It varies. But I like to work at a white-hot tempo. And so Al walked in the door. I turned to the operator. Okay for you, good for me. Next setup. Nobody could quite believe it. No protection shot, nothing. So the first day we worked 3 different locations at some distance from each other. But I did that deliberately so that the crew geared up very, very quickly. Also, when you do that right off the bat, you can immediately spot if you've got any weak link in the crew. And it's best to take care of that right at the beginning. And Al, of course, was stunned because he'd been working with, bless him, that great, great director, Coppola. And he had just finished Godfather 1. And he had come from this big, ponderous movie machine, making this great movie, into this mad Jewish lunatic who was covering 3 locations in one day and 1 print and let's go. He rapidly found out that for that character, it was a wonderful way to shoot because it meant that state that he was in which his inner tension had to be so high, there wasn't an enormous amount of time between takes, and that was a tremendous help to him.
There was a time when Al would take his character from the soundstage into the street. I mean, it's very hard when you're playing this kind of a character not to continue his character. And there were times he would walk through the streets in areas he shouldn't have been walking in because they were relatively dangerous. But he did. He wanted to get the feel of what Frank was doing. And it translated into the character that he did on the film.
Hey! I'm a police officer!
Pacino is an incredible acting talent. No secret to anyone. The method of work was not just intense, but he needed to be literally in the state that character was in that day, depending on the scene you were shooting.
It's safe! It's safe! With my ass on the line, it's safe, right? For you, fella.
That inability to shed that particular state, if the scene that day that you're shooting is about a deep unhappiness and let's say the character's just lashing out left and right at anybody who's around him, Al will behave that way that day.
What are you doing?
If the scene is comedic, he'll be a joy. He'll be laughing, scratching, making a fuss, making everybody laugh. Crew, me, anybody.
Next life.
It's a tough way to work, but it sure results in brilliance.
You might get by in the Bronx with that kind of shit. But down here...
One of the first obligations that one feels toward the audience is, hey folks, this really happened. We may have condensed time, we may have combined people, but essentially everything that happened in this movie really happened. One way of making that clear to an audience is by not giving them actors with whom they have previous associations. Al was in the first burst of his own fame, so even Al was familiar to the audience from really only one picture. And in New York, the last thing you have to worry about is actors. You can stand on any corner, turn around 5 times, and cast the picture. The talent is never ending.
We were making the film at a price, and also working with unknown actors gave the film a reality. And in those days, the film was more important than the actors. There was not a great deal of concern about how do you open this movie? What do you think we'll do on the first weekend? That didn't exist. The film existed, the story, okay? That was the essence of the film. Most films then. Very different today.
If you're doing a picture that's almost on the naturalistic level that Serpico is, the locations are so critical. The first thing you start with, of course, is the truth. Where did it actually happen? How does that work out? The truth is very often duller than you want it to be, so how do we heighten it? New York, for me, it's the back of my hand. It's something I know so well. I've lived here all my life. Well, I remember at that time down in the meatpacking district, which is 14th Street and 10th Avenue, there was a triangular building that was red. I just knew of that building. I'd passed it for years. And there was a particular scene, and immediately That was the place to shoot the scene, even though I checked out where it had taken place originally. The precincts were much the same thing. Some of them were boring. So there was an old precinct in Brooklyn that I think had been built in 1876. It was just great. That, funnily enough, has become the television cliche by now. We use that quite heavily. We shot the film backwards because in a piece like this, where you really need the truth of locations and the truth of the sound and the look of everything, and because I'd be working in great close-up with him a lot of the time, the last thing you want to do is be able to see the line of a fake beard. So he grew a real beard, and we started with the sequences in which he had the full beard, then went to the sequences in which he had less of a beard, and then finally the sequences where he was clean-shaven, so that we could use his real growth.
The problem is that the atmosphere does not yet exist in which an honest police officer can act.
Before Serpico appeared at the Knapp Commission, and when he did appear at the Knapp Commission, he was disliked enormously and in danger.
You know how to handle guys like you.
It's funny, I did a picture many years later called Prince of the City, and the advertising copy in the ad they took, it was a wonderful line. It said, he's the most dangerous thing in the world, an honest cop. And at that time, it was really true. So I was wondering what would happen. Not only what would happen in a precinct with real cops around, but also we had in those days assigned to us, and we still do today, from the tactical police force, we have 2 policemen assigned to us who stay with us over the body of the movie and to help us with traffic and obstreperous people who want to do that to the camera. So I was wondering what their reaction would be. It's fascinating. As soon as they saw that the picture was an honest picture, by that I mean the actors weren't wearing makeup, the language sounded familiar to them, it didn't ring with what they were expecting, which would be a Hollywood version of New York cops. They were wonderful. They not only didn't interfere, they actively helped us. And an interesting kind of turnaround in terms of their own experience in watching what we were portraying in terms of Serpico's life. Over and over again, I'd hear from him, yeah, that's what it was like, which I found fascinating. The only hard part of the movie was the pace at which it had to be shot, edited, and mixed. It was an intense 4.5 months. The shooting itself, the level of inspiration, the up and back between Al and myself, and the give and take of that was so exciting. He was having such a good time. I was having such a good time. There were no problems in the shooting. It just went like a dream, as it did in the subsequent picture with Al. We just get onto a mutual wavelength where the work itself was a pleasure. So that the only problem was the schedule. There was a brutal variation in the editing. We started shooting right after the July 4th holiday, and we already knew from Dino that we were going to open at Christmas. So that would be July, August, September, October, November. That means 5 months from starting to shoot till the picture opening. That's an insanely short time. So that the editing had to go along as we were shooting. Normally, I don't like to do that. I like to wait till the picture's over, get everybody away, calm down, everybody, cool your whole brain off, and go in there now and really take a second look. There was just no time for that on this. So the Dee Dee was editing right behind us. I'd finish a scene. 48 hours later, that scene was ready to be turned over to the sound department. It was the only way the picture was going to get done. I wasn't surprised at how good the reviews were. My memory is that they were very good, and certainly I felt it would be wonderful for Al. I was surprised at how successful the picture was, commercially, because after all, this is a picture in which the last shot is you see this poor son of a bitch sitting by the Hudson River with a great big dog, no life left for him in America, about to take off to France for God knows what, doesn't even speak the language. Not exactly the most rah-rah ending anybody ever saw. And I was delighted that it did the business it did because it shows the perennial thing that the audience is always more grown up than most studios think they are.
We're going to get the indictments. You're going to have to testify.
It's very difficult. Not that many people that can make a reality-based film and draw an audience into that. And it certainly doesn't happen much anymore. He brought a talent into this. I mean, he's a very gifted man. Well, the first time I saw Pacino on stage, I thought he was a genius. Serpico made Al Pacino a movie star. He was great in Godfather, but Serpico was his movie, and that's what made him a movie star. He's still there. A little older, but he's still there.
If you love a man's garden, you gotta love the man.
I don't take myself that seriously that I judge picture by picture. I'm very grateful for the hits because they get you the money for the flops. You know, you're just not going to exist without them. To me, because I never know how it's going to come out. I don't know whether the picture will be what I want it to be. I don't know whether it'll be successful in my terms. So that the faith that I put into a project is in the work process itself. Was it a good creative time doing it? Because we don't know what the result is going to be like. And Serpico was a wonderful creative time. So the picture for me on an inside level, on an internal level, was successful all during the shooting and when I finished it. And still, I look back on it as a picture of great happiness. And thank God it happened. We wound up with some nominations. So it was really a happy occasion in the making of it, and certainly my reaction to it afterwards.
Favorite moment? Probably when the character turns down the badge when he's in the hospital. It's a very moving moment, and it's beautifully acted and beautifully directed, where he's overwhelmed by what he believes, and which was this tragedy that has taken place in his life. Something he's always wanted. He's unable to accept it.
There are two scenes that seem to me the essence of that man's life and the essence of the movie. One is just one shot. It's a shot where he comes in disguised as a Hasidic rabbi. It's a hilarious moment. Al did it marvelously. And it's got the whole ridiculousness and the whole comedic madness of what that life must have been like. The nuttiness of it. The absolute truth about the life that Serpico was leading. The other scene is a scene in which Serpico and McClane are under the Hell's Gate Bridge in Queens, and he's warning him not to go to an outside. Al took off from the script during the take, and the intensity that he gathered and the frustration that he was feeling in this situation of this guy from the police department who was supposed to help him, and is not only not helping him, is actively trying to block him. The drama that arose, the intensity that arose, and as I say, a scene of such frustration because his life was on the line. At the end of it, the guy walks away from him. And Al started screaming after him. He went, you. It was the dramatic side of everything that Frank Serpico went through and that Al went through in that performance. It was just an extraordinary scene that's in my memory. For certain kinds of stories, I think that there shouldn't be any music, because if the music cannot make a contribution all its own, why put it in there? You wouldn't put a scene in that you didn't need. You wouldn't use a character that you didn't need. Music is another character. If you don't need it, don't use it. And I've done a lot of pictures without any score at all. In this one, I could not figure out a function for the music. And so we finished shooting, and I was getting ready for the mix, and producer Dino De Laurentiis, who I adore, a wonderful man, a brave man, said, Sidney, who's doing the score? And I said, Dino, I don't want to score. And it was as if I'd stuck a dagger in his heart. After all, he's Italian, you know. And he that was unacceptable to him. And I did not have Final Cut in those days. In fact, it was right after that I got Final Cut. And with all due respect to Dino, I was terrified that he would take the picture back to Italy, put wall-to-wall carpeting in. There'd be music. If the picture ran 2 hours and 14 minutes, there'd be 2 hours of music in it. And it's the last thing, of course, that I wanted. I felt it would ruin the picture. And then an extraordinarily good piece of luck happened. A marvelous composer and a great man named Theodorakis, a Greek composer, had just been released from prison. He was there was a military junta in charge of the government in Greece then, and he had been a political prisoner for well over a year, and he had just been let out of prison, and that day flew out to Paris. And I reached him in Paris. And I was absolutely honest. I introduced myself on the phone. And thank God he knew my work a little. And I was absolutely honest with him. I said, look, the producer wants a score, and I don't want one. So what I would love you to do is come take a look at this picture. See what you can find that goes very simply, and then we'll sit down at what we call the spotting session. That's where we place the music in the picture. And I'm telling you now, I'm going to want as little as possible. And he said, it sounds wonderful, because he said, I've just gotten out of prison, and my head isn't back into music, and this is a perfect way to get a transition. He flew out from Paris the next day for New York. His plane got in unbelievably late. I had a screening room set up for like an 8 o'clock screening or something like that. And at 1 a.m. he landed. We had a car waiting, and we started screening at about 2 o'clock. He looked at the picture. He said, you're absolutely right, it shouldn't have a score. So I said, so what do we do? He said, I think I've got something. And he said, now the problem is, I'm going on tour because my last couple of weeks in prison, I knew I'd need money desperately. I didn't know that this picture would come up. And so I arranged a tour in the United States, going from Greek community to Greek community with a Greek orchestra, playing some of my movie music, Never on Sunday, and so on and so forth, because he said, I need the dough desperately. So the point is, I won't be able to do the arrangements myself. And I said, don't worry about that. I know a great arranger by the name of Bob James, who is not only a great jazz pianist, but a superb arranger. I said, Bob will do the orchestrations, and wherever you are in your tour, he'll fly out with the arrangements in hand. You look them over. If you're happy with them, make a correction if you want to. Back it comes. And I said, in the meantime, we're going to make you a lot richer than you figured on being, because American companies pay a lot for a score. And for somebody like you, they will pay a lot. And so he wound up with a good check. Dino wound up with the prestige of having Theodorakis write his score. There was a score in the movie. I wound up happily because, including titles, there's only 14 minutes of music in the movie.